Night presses over the Atlantic in 1493, and the creak of timbers sounds like breath under the stars. 17 ships slip from Cádiz, not to glimpse a shoreline, but to plant one. What changes when a voyage is no longer discovery but settlement? Men board with carpenters' axes, seeds, pigs, cattle, and inked instructions to found a town, levy tribute, and keep accounts. Priests carry breviaries and hopes for souls, while soldiers carry crossbows, swords, and the quiet certainty that order will be enforced. How does the second voyage begin to redraw the map of the Caribbean in weeks, not years? On the 3rd of November 1493, the fleet reaches Dominica, then Guadeloupe, then a procession of the Lesser Antilles like beads on a cord. By month's end, the prows cut toward Boriken, renamed San Juan Bautista, and then the compass settles on La Española, magnet for ambition and catechism alike. Where does the first lasting Spanish town rise, and what does it sound like? La Isabela appears on the north coast in January 1494. Hammered into existence between surf and jungle. Hammers ring, oxen strain, a rough church takes shape, and a small cemetery grows faster than the storehouse. Why does the rumor of gold pull the colony inland before its ribs are strong? The name Cibao whispers of flakes in river sands, and that whisper becomes command. A timber fort, Santo Tomas, stakes the claim, and from its palisade miners swirl muddy pans while scouts trace new paths along green tunnels of river and vine. What turns exchange into discipline and misreading into war? Early visits with caciques begin with gifts and vows, but hunger and quotas harden into demands. The capture of Caonabó by ruse, the clatter of chains disguised as ornaments, and the unleashing of war dogs announce that the edge has been crossed. How is dominance proven in a clearing that remembers every footstep? In March 1495 at La Vega Real, mounted lances shatter ranks and crossbows darken the air. The plain echoes with hoofbeats and cries, and the ground swallows the last doubts about which language will decide the next harvest. Why does the colony falter even as its flag holds the wind? Because bread molds in damp storehouses, rain leaks through planks, and fevers take men overnight. Rations shrink to handfuls, promises of gold shrink to motes, and the line at the quartermaster's table grows longer than the list of miracles. Who keeps the ledger when the ocean keeps the clock? A notary scratches names into a book, while bells mark hours that food does not respect. The first repartimientos of labor are inked as if ink could ease a wound, and the word encomienda arrives like a promise wrapped around an order. Why does the first city smell of departure almost as soon as it is named? La Isabela sits where the water turns foul and the soil grows thin. Waves gnaw, roofs rot, tempers fray, and the wind from the sea begins to sound not like a lullaby, but like a summons to move. What lesson does the river teach that the shore refused to learn? In 1496, Bartolomé Colón draws lines beside the Ozama and calls them Santo Domingo. Stone replaces plank, a plaza organizes heat and commerce, and the river's steady pull offers a spine for streets, stores, and sentences. Why does this matter now, when cities rise in months and supply chains stretch like wire? Because La Isabela is a case study in speed without suitability, and Santo Domingo is a counterexample built on correction. Location, logistics, governance, and respect for prior inhabitants decide whether a blueprint becomes a city or a cautionary tale. How does the third voyage open a door that the second barely noticed? In 1498, 6 ships slip south, and the bows find Trinidad and the Gulf of Paria. Sailors taste the surface and flinch at the sweetness of the sea, discovering that a giant river, the Orinoco, pushes its fresh breath miles into salt. Why doesn't a new geography extinguish old fires? Because map edges do not buy grain or stop rebellions. When the admiral returns to La Española, the colony seethes. The Roldan uprising turns hunger into politics, and negotiations spill more words than any inkpot wants to hold. What binds a colony when rope and ritual are no longer enough? Paper tries, with ordinances and pardons and allotments that move men like counters on a board. Yet every signature creates a precedent, and every precedent trims authority until it fits too loosely to warm anyone. Why does an empire send a judge instead of more supplies? Because the crown wants order more than sympathy, accounts more than anecdotes. In 1500, Francisco de Bobadilla arrives, investigates, arrests the three brothers, and sends them home in chains to separate exploration from administration. What remains of the Taíno world as the ink grows thicker? Empty plazas, interrupted rituals, burdens measured in days of labor instead of baskets of yucca, and bodies weakened by illnesses without antidote. The landscape is renamed, the calendar is reset, and the river learns to carry timber and tribute alongside fish. How do forts and folios cooperate to make a colony last? Iron holds the day, but ink holds the year. And between cannon and codex, the machinery of extraction gears into motion. Ports tally pearls and gold dust, ledgers tally baptisms and marriages, and the grid of ownership spreads like shadow at noon. Why do we still hear these early years when we plan mines, ports, or new towns today? Because the cadence of expectation, scarcity, coercion, and correction has not gone silent. Every rush for resources risks repeating the bargain made in the Cibao, and every blueprint must decide whether its profit includes people or spends them. What explains the move from a failing shore to a durable river city, a better harbor, a healthier water source, and a plan that respects the slope of land and the pace of supply? Once houses stack in stone, the bell replaces the wind as timekeeper, and permanence stops pretending. How do the voyages themselves change when the goal is no longer wonder but routine? The first voyage sings of horizons. The second and third speak of schedules. Cargo lists grow longer than stories, and the ocean becomes the hallway between offices. Why does gold begin to sound like a warning rather than a hymn? Because each flake weighs more than its shine, measured in bodies gone to fever or fatigue, and in villages emptied to pay for someone else's timetable. The true ledger is not the one the treasurer signs, but the one the island keeps in silence. What does the Admiral's Fall teach about the difference between daring and ruling? That seamanship and statecraft rhyme but do not overlap, and that no amount of courage at sea guarantees patience or justice on land. A name can discover a route, but an institution decides whether that route becomes a road. Why does the Gulf of Paria matter beyond a sailor's surprise? Because sweet water on salt proves a continent beyond the islands, and that certainty bends strategy, commerce, and conquest for centuries. It is a hinge moment where the world grows larger and the obligations grow heavier. How do we measure the cost of the first towns beyond numbers and dates? In the sound of a leaking roof at midnight, the weight of a ledger on a tired wrist, the silence where a festival used to be, the thud of a shovel in a grave that no one planned to dig. History records events, but life records intervals. What bridges carry power from throne to jungle without breaking? Careers, commissions, and courts, each writing the other into permanence. Once the precedent exists, it travels faster than any ship and arrives before the next wave breaks. Why should we care now about a fort in the Cibao or a bell in Santo Domingo? Because those choices, where to build, whom to tax, how to govern, compose the grammar that later cities still speak. If we want a different literature of development, we must unlearn the sentences that began there. What remains when the sails come down, the chains clink shut, and the plaza empties at dusk? A river that keeps moving, a city that changes names less often than laws, and a memory that refuses to be only triumph or only tragedy. The lesson is harsh and useful at once. If discovery is a spark and government is a furnace, have we learned to heat without burning what we claim to build?